Hey everyone, and welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today we're going to talk about a stock that has been making headlines lately, for some interesting reasons. It's USB, that's US Bancorp.
Okay.
Now get this, they just had an earnings beat, but their stock price dipped. It's actually been down since they announced their fourth quarter 2024 earnings, which was on January 16th, 2025. And even though the stock closed up 1.32% for the day on January 24th at $49.07.
Right.
So what's going on here? Is this a buying opportunity or, is there something else going on?
Yeah.
To try to figure this out, we're going to be looking at recent news about USB, and we're also going to be looking at what analysts are saying. And then we'll even look at some technical indicators.
Sounds good.
Okay? So to start off, it's not that unusual, right, to see a stock price drop even after they beat their earnings estimates.
It's actually not that unusual because the market is always trying to predict the future. And sometimes what looks good on paper doesn't actually tell the whole story.
That's true. So even though USB beat their earnings expectations, what do you think might have spooked investors?
Well, for starters, while their adjusted earnings per share were better than expected, the diluted EPS came in at $1.01,
Okay.
falling short of the $1.05 that analysts were expecting. So that can make investors wonder if future earnings might not be as good as they hoped.
Right. So there might be something coming up that's going to hurt future earnings.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then there was also some news about their prime lending rate.
Right. Wasn't there recently some news about that?
Right. Back in December, U.S. Bancorp announced a decrease in their prime lending rate
Okay.
from 7.75% to 7.5%.
Got it.
This was on December 19th, 2024, to be exact. And this kind of move, especially now with interest rates the way they are, can make investors a little nervous.
Especially when it comes to the bank's interest income,
Yep.
right? And how profitable they're going to be.
Exactly.
And then there were also some leadership changes at U.S. Bancorp recently, right?
Exactly. Anytime you have a change at the top, it can create uncertainty,
Yeah,
especially for investors who are trying to gauge the future direction of the company.
absolutely. So we've got some reasons, right, for why investors might be hesitant about USB. But let's look at some technical indicators. So I know that USB is currently trading below its 50-day exponential moving average,
Okay.
but it is above its 200-day EMA. So what does that tell us about the stock's momentum?
That's a great question. So think of moving averages kind of like trend lines. They help us smooth out the day-to-day price fluctuations and kind of see the bigger picture. The 50-day EMA, being a shorter-term indicator, is suggesting that there's some weakness in recent weeks. But the fact that it's still holding above the 200-day EMA, which is a longer-term trend, could actually be a positive sign. It suggests that there's some underlying support for the stock price.
So it's sort of a mixed bag when it comes to the technical indicators.
It is.
And it really highlights how important it is to look at multiple indicators
Exactly.
before making any investment decisions.
Yeah.
So then what about the relative strength index? What is that looking like?
That's another piece of the puzzle. So the RSI for USB is currently around 36.53, which is getting pretty close to what we call oversold territory.
Okay, and what does oversold mean to people that aren't familiar with that?
Well, in simple terms, an oversold stock is one that's seen a significant drop in price, relative to its recent trading range.
Okay.
So basically means the selling pressure might be kind of getting exhausted,
Okay.
and the stock could be poised for a little bit of a rebound.
So are there any other technical indicators that we should be aware of?
There are. However, some of them are sending conflicting signals, right?
Oh, yeah.
Making it even more crucial to look at the broader context. So, for example, the MACD, the moving average convergence divergence,
Okay.
is actually flashing a potential sell signal, while the CCI, or Commodity Channel Index, is saying the stock might actually be overbought.
Oh, wow.
So again, this just reinforces that we shouldn't rely on any single indicator, in isolation.
Got it. Okay. So technically speaking, things are a little unclear with USB, but let's zoom out a little bit and look at the company's overall financial health and their growth potential.
Yeah.
Starting with their recent performance, it seems like USB had some pretty solid results in the fourth quarter of 2024.
Yeah, they did. Their net income came in at a strong $1,663 million.
Wow.
And their return on tangible common equity, which is essentially, how effectively they're using shareholder funds to make profits, is looking pretty healthy.
Okay. And for context, can you remind us what their market cap and their capital adequacy ratio are?
Sure. Their market cap is currently sitting at $76.5 billion,
Okay.
and they've got a strong capital adequacy ratio of 10.6%.
Okay.
And that ratio is just a measure of the bank's financial strength and its ability to withstand potential losses. So a ratio of 10.6% suggests that USB is in a pretty solid position.
That's good. And from what I've read, it sounds like their CEO, Andy Cecere, he's pretty optimistic about the future.
He is, he is.
But the banking industry as a whole is facing some headwinds right now. Fluctuating interest rates, economic uncertainty on the horizon, and there's always the possibility of new regulations coming down the pipeline.
You're absolutely right. Those are all very real challenges that can impact a bank's performance. But U.S. Bancorp seems to be well positioned to weather these storms.
Okay, what makes you say that?
Well, for one, they have a diversified business model, which helps to spread the risk. And they've also been really prudent with their risk management strategies.
Got it.
So these factors give them a level of resilience that some other banks might not have.
So that probably explains why we're seeing such a range of opinions from analysts.
Yeah.
Some of them have given USB a hold rating. Others are saying it's a buy.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of variation in price targets.
Right. It just goes to show that there's no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to investing. And this is exactly why it's so important to not just blindly follow analyst ratings. Instead, you need to understand the reasoning behind their recommendations. Like, what are their assumptions about the future? What are their specific concerns or points of optimism?
So what does all of this mean for someone who is thinking about adding USB to their portfolio?
Well, there's a few potential opportunities to consider.
Okay.
So for those with a long-term investment horizon, USB is forecasting decent earnings growth.
Okay.
Analysts are projecting EPS to hit $4.36 for fiscal year 2025. They also have a really solid track record of paying dividends, with 50 cents per share declared in the fourth quarter of 2024.
Okay.
And some analysts think that this recent dip in price might actually make USB a little undervalued.
So it sounds like USB is kind of a puzzle right now.
It is.
There are signs of strength, but also some potential risks and challenges to consider. So I'm curious to hear what you think are some of the key takeaways from all of the information that we've discussed.
I think the biggest takeaway is that USB is at a crossroads. They've shown resilience in a tough market, but there are some uncertainties that could impact their future performance.
So what should investors be paying attention to in the coming months when it comes to USB? What are the key factors that could really make a difference in their performance?
Well, interest rates are definitely at the top of the list.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The Federal Reserve's decisions, can have a big impact on banks like USB.
Right.
For example, if they keep raising interest rates, it could make it more expensive for USB to borrow money, and that could cut into their profits.
And what about the economy as a whole? How does that play into USB's outlook?
That's another really important factor. A strong economy usually means more people and businesses borrowing money, which is good for banks.
Right.
But if the economy weakens, then we could see slower loan growth.
Okay.
And maybe even an increase in loan defaults,
Yeah.
which would obviously hurt USB's bottom line.
So interest rates and the economy, those are the big macroeconomic trends to watch. But are there any USB-specific factors that investors should be keeping an eye on?
Absolutely. One thing that makes USB a little different is their focus on regional banking.
Okay.
They have a strong presence in the Midwest and West,
Got it.
which could be good or bad.
How so?
Well, if those regional economies do better than the national average, USB is in a great spot to benefit.
Right.
But if those regions struggle, it could hit USB harder than some of their competitors who are more spread out geographically.
So it's all about balancing the potential upsides and downsides.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to do your homework and understand the specific things that could affect USB's performance.
Okay, so let's recap what we've learned about USB, US Bancorp, ticker symbol USB.
Okay.
We started by talking about that their stock price dropped after they beat earnings for the fourth quarter of 2024.
Right.
It seems like investors might be reacting to a few things. The diluted EPS being lower than expected, the decrease in their prime lending rate,
Yeah,
and maybe even some uncertainty about the leadership changes.
that's right.
Then we talked about technical analysis,
We did.
and it could be kind of hard to interpret sometimes.
Yeah,
Some indicators, like the 50-day EMA, show weakness in the short term, but others, like the RS, I'd suggest the stock might be oversold and ready to bounce back.
Yeah, around 36.53.
Exactly. And then we talked about the bigger picture interest rates,
Yeah.
the economic outlook,
Right.
and USB's focus on specific regions.
Yeah.
All important factors when you're thinking about investing.
It really shows that investing isn't just about simple yes or no answers.
Right.
It's about weighing a lot of different factors and making decisions that work for your own investment goals.
That's a great point.
Hmm.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to ask you something. We've talked a lot about the numbers and trends.
Yeah.
But what stood out to you the most about USB from everything we've discussed today?
That's a great question. I think what really struck me is this balancing act USB seems to be doing,
What do you mean?
trying to stay steady in a shaky market while also adapting to the changing banking industry.
Okay.
For example, their focus on technology and digital banking is interesting.
Yeah.
The banking sector is changing so fast, and it seems like USB is trying to stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, it makes sense that they'd be focusing on innovation, especially with all the changes happening in finance. Speaking of disruption, I'm curious about something. We talked about interest rates and the economy as potential headwinds.
Yeah.
But what about fintech? All these new financial technology companies popping up. Do you think they pose a serious threat to traditional banks like USB?
That's the big question everyone's asking.
Yeah.
And it's a good one.
Right.
Fintech companies are quick to adapt. They understand technology, and they can offer lower fees and easier services.
Right.
So they're definitely a challenge.
Do you think they could actually put traditional banks out of business?
I don't think it's that simple. Traditional banks like USB still have a lot going for them. They have established brands, lots of customers, and years of experience.
Okay.
So they know how to deal with complex regulations.
So you think the future will be a mix of traditional banking and fintech?
That's what I think we're moving towards. Traditional banks will need to adapt and innovate to keep their customers happy, while fintech companies will need to learn how to grow bigger and deal with the rules and regulations as they become more mainstream.
That's going to be interesting to see how it all works out.
It really will.
I think that's a good place to wrap up our conversation about USB. They're at an interesting point right now, just like the rest of the banking industry.
Definitely.
There are challenges ahead,
Mhm.
but also chances for growth and change.
Absolutely.
And for investors, it all comes down to carefully thinking about the risks and the potential rewards. All right, so there you have it, everyone. Our take on U.S. Bancorp, ticker symbol USBB. And hopefully this has given you a better understanding of, what's going on with this stock and some things to think about if you're considering adding it to your portfolio.
Yeah, and remember, investing is all about making good decisions. Don't just take our word for it.
Right.
Do your own research. Think about your goals, your risk tolerance. You could even talk to a financial advisor before making any moves.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And remember, what's good for one investor might not be good for another. There's no special formula. It's all about finding investments that make sense for you and your goals.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on USB? Do you think it's a buy, a hold, or are you staying away? Head over to the comment section and let us know what you think. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast and share this episode with anyone who might find it interesting.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, happy investing.